it might have seemed as though the Red Hill Valley paving scandal was in our rearview mirror. But this week it came crashing back into focus when we started to hear confirmation about maybe some of our worst fears. We heard confirmation that they knew about the problems with the road before they even finished paving it. We got confirmation that the current mayor had asked that the report about it not go through the regular channels so that the media wouldn't see it. I don't know a better definition of a cover-up than that. Those are just some of the things that we have learned since this public inquiry finally got to the public part. And there's no one who's been watching it closer than journalist Joey Coleman.
Red Hill Parkway was built in 2006-2007, and it was the first major highway to be paved solely with SMA material, stone mason asphalt. And the reason that this material was picked was because environmental impacts. It was believed that it would last longer than a regular hot mix that's used on your 400 series highways. It would decrease the amount of noise by 3 decibels, which, remember, the decibels are logarithmic, so that's half the noise in a urban highway going through residential neighborhoods. And it would have improved skid resistance compared to regular asphalt. Turns out it didn't. Turns out that, in fact, the hope that friction on the roadway would increase did not occur. Friction decreased. And we have various parties coming together, and this is what the inquiry is going to get us to, is who knew what, when, and who communicated to who, and who did not. So during the early days of the highway, we start to have collisions, and people are reporting that it feels like black ice in the middle of summer. They're describing that. We have ramps at Mud Street where cars are constantly ending up in the ditch. And we have people that are experiencing these collisions, police and the actual working city road crews, the ones that are out there that do the actual work, saying this, every time it rains, people are sliding off the road. But by 2013, Gary Moore, the city's director of engineering, who is credited as the person that decided that kept this expressway alive, who helped build it, who was involved in deciding on the asphalt. There's friction testing. He gets the report, and for the next 5 years, he keeps the report from everyone except a lawyer. And so he's got that football. Well, at the same time, the Ministry of Transportation, and this is getting to what was reported today and what the inquiry is dealing with right now, the Ministry of Transportation stops using SMA for portions of its highway because it has concerns about SMA. It decides it's going to test the Red Hill because it's interested to see this new material, how it's working, and their reports are showing concerns. But those concerns that are coming from the professional engineers are being shot down by the managerial staff as, we don't have a standard, we've never set a standard, liability, we're not sure, your gut feeling might not be correct. So they know there's a problem. Gary Moore knows there's a problem. Councillors are receiving complaints. Councillors at times are asking the right questions. They're not getting the right answers. But then we get to City Hall culture. And this was Friday on the stand. Chris Murray, who, in probably one of the most fascinating parts of the testimony yet, is Dan McKinnon takes over Public Works in 2017. And Dan McKinnon has to evaluate Gary Moore. And Gary Moore is one of council's favorites. You've seen Gary all the time at City Hall, hanging around, chatting with the councilors out back while they're smoking, chatting it up. He's buddy with the councilors. He spends more time in City Hall than he does at his office on Wentworth Street. So it was quite the act by Dan McKinnon to write in his 2017 evaluation that, yes, Gary's hit all the benchmarks, but he's got a management style that Murray disagrees with. Dan McKinnon describes that he writes, quote, Gary and I continue to have fundamental differences around leadership style. But having said that, I feel Gary and I agree on the fundamentals of many issues, and I always appreciate our spirited conversations. Now, the evaluation, because Gary is a director, has to be reviewed by Chris Murray. And on June 24th, 2018, Chris Murray, in his own handwriting, writes, "I appreciate the use of the term spirited when some might say might otherwise use problematic." And it was fascinating because, of course, the inquiry asks Chris Murray, "What do you mean by problematic?" That's a fascinating term.
Right.
And Chris Murray said, "Well, he's very direct. He's very honest. He's very direct, very honest." And of course, we have in the documents, we have emails of staff in the traffic safety division saying, "We have a problem," and then reporting that Gary Moore's shutting them down. And that's culture.
Yeah, that is culture. But, and I think we've had this conversation many times, culture starts at the top. The leaders set the tone. And the leaders of the city of Hamilton are the elected representatives that we hire, that we pay for every 4 years, to go in there to make sure that these professional staff have the kind of guidance, culture, values, etc., in order to be able to do business on our behalf ethically. And so when you're starting to tell a tale of knowledge of a problem with paving and of staffing having spirited discussions, but still the information doesn't come to light, let's not forget people have died on this road. This isn't just something about maybe some poor management or culture. This is about death.
So this is very Fred being Fred. And I use Fred being Fred, much like Terry being Terry, like Gary being Gary. These are terms at City Hall. And we've heard that Gary yelling at staff was Gary being Gary. Terry yelling at and so Fred, when he finally finds out that this is happening, Fred's reaction is, let's manage this. Let's keep this from the public as long as we can. So on the Red Hill, they had to release a report because you have both the class action lawsuit and an excellent freedom of information request by Nicole O'Reilly of the Hamilton Spectator. And so how this comes out is in 2018, Gary Moore retires as director of engineering. He's then hired back as a contractor consultant, however you want to phrase it, which is very common. So your pension, you're collecting your pension, you're now working for the city another way. Gary takes the report, which he had been keeping from everyone, and puts it into a document management system with all the stuff as he's retiring. So he puts it in there. At the same time, you have Nicole O'Reilly files an FOI, which very specifically says, I want anything that mentions friction. You have a new director of engineering who happens to come across the report when looking for something else in the file management system. You've got the lawyers, and so it's all come together and no longer can remain hidden. And that's the moment where council says, let's reveal it. And what was fascinating when you read the council emails that are in front of the judicial inquiry is the shock that council has at how the public is not tolerating this idea of, we'll take care of it through an internal review.
What I'm hearing from you, and what's been my experience, at least from all the whistleblowers that reached out to me over the last 20 years, is that, stuff like this, and this is among the worst, because people have died, you have to have cover on council. You gotta have some of that old guard watching over your back, so that you have a feckless city manager who can't really do anything and has no real power. And the only time that there was a city manager they hired who didn't put up with that, he didn't last long. Lychuk was out the door. So they managed, it seemed, and tell me if I'm wrong, but Chris Murray, did he even have any teeth in this? Is he able to just walk away and say, I had spirited discussions but couldn't do anything because Gary had cover on council? I mean, who can we hold responsible for this? Who's coming through is responsible for this other than this engineer?
Chris Murray testified on Friday that he had no idea that there were issues on the Red Hill. It never came to his attention. The inquiry asked some interesting questions. They presented some interesting evidence. Mr. Murray answered, so for example, on the death of one of the two girls who died, the 19-year-old, her mother worked for the city. And so her mother working at the city, the director in that department sends an email to the city manager to inform him that this has occurred, that support's being offered and details are forthcoming. Mr. Murray's executive assistant says, Chris, this is so heartbreaking. Are you thinking of visitation, sending a card, sending flowers? He responds back, cards, and I'm quoting exactly, cards and flowers, Darlene. The fact that it was on the Red Hill makes what is unimaginably sad even worse. He was asked about that by the inquiry. What do you mean by that? Why on the Red Hill was it even worse? And he gave a vague answer regarding, that it was tragic because there was a long history on the Red Hill without going into what that history was. And he was asked a little bit earlier, he had never received any information. He was not aware of the complaints about wet weather, but we have in the documentary evidence that following the Spectator running a story on September 21st, 2013, titled Rain to Blame for Accident-Filled Day on Red Hill Valley Parkway. That evening, Peggy Chapman, who chief of staff to Mayor Bob Bertina, sent the article to Chris Murray with the comment, can we please hand over this to the province? Chris Murray, and it didn't flood, ... Peggy Chapman, nope, just bad drivers. We should sell insurance billboards along the road, ! Ha, ha, ha.
Wait a second.
And
Hold on. Chris Murray, the city manager, responded to the mayor's executive assistant, or I forget Peggy's title at the time, chief of staff. We should do billboards for insurance. It's driving.
No, so that's Peggy.
Oh, that's Peggy.
So Peggy Chapman said that. Sorry,
Okay.
Miss Chapman said that.
Well, Peggy watches the Oshow regularly, so I'm sure I'll hear from Peggy if I got it wrong. So just do the exchange one more time, Joey, so we're clear for everybody's sake.
So Peggy Chapman sends the article to the city manager, Chris Murray. Her email is, can we hand this road over to the province? ? Exclamation mark, smiley emoji.
Okay.
Chris Murray responds, and it didn't flood, ... Then Peggy Chapman responds to Chris Murray stating, nope, ! Just bad drivers, ... We should sell insurance billboards along the road, ! Ha, ha, ha. And again, Chris Murray says that he was not being briefed, that as city manager, he's very high level. It's not day-to-day operations. But of course, you and I both recall that the roadway flooded many times before that issue was fixed.
Yes.
And it didn't flood from Chris Murray in response. Must have that context. And let's be blunt. The city manager reads the Hamilton Spectator.
Joey, I was in one of those floods. It's the reason why I bought an SUV after that, because only the SUVs could save themselves and get out of that flood. And there was literally fire trucks trying to rescue people who were drowning in their vehicles on trying to get off an off ramp. It was a disaster. And so, I mean, it's up to the judge at the inquiry, am I correct, to look at all these testimonies versus the facts of what went down and say, BS, or yeah, no, the guy knew nothing? I mean, do we leave? What is the process here? Is there going to be a conclusion from the judge that's in charge?
The judge is going to do that. Okay. And we had some legal wrangling during Mr. Murray's testimony with the city lawyer objecting to the lines of questions about culture and character at City Hall. And so the judge was very clear, which is, there is weighing that's going to be given. So the letter that was sent to the Auditor General of the city, which laid out quite an amount of detail that only an insider would know. Because it's anonymous, it cannot be given much weight by the inquiry because you can't cross-examine that anonymous individual. That said, it's informative alongside the evidence that is tested that can be cross-examined. And so we're going to get that. And on the city side, we're going to end up, at this point, I see three aspects to the inquiry. Okay. Aspect one is the report. How did Gary Moore receive the report and keep it from everyone else? And I have to stress that the documents at this point show that he held the football and hit it, to use an analogy. The second part will be City Hall culture that enables all of this. And the culture that staff on the front lines, and staff in traffic safety are at numerous times shut down when they're saying there's a problem here, we need to fix it. The third part, and this gets to the where we're at in the inquiry right now, is that the MTO, in the days before the Red Hill opens, they've done their testing. They're very concerned about the friction to start. They found spotty friction, which is very problematic because the experts who started, academics at the beginning, started the inquiry by explaining that inconsistent friction, consistent road friction causes collisions because people do not expect to suddenly not have the friction that they were enjoying, which is what we've heard numerous times, the black ice analogies. Yeah. And so the third part of the inquiry, and this is province-wide and substantive, a bit technical and nerdy, is going to be, why did we never have set standards for frictions on our roads? Why was it that the MTO had concerns, they never get expressed?
And I think that's an important discussion, especially given, the provincial election, all about the roads and new highways and everything else going on. But I just don't, we're coming to time here, Joey, only because I obviously have to have you back. I mean, this thing is iterative. We're gonna keep hearing more and more stuff. And I'm so thankful that you laid it all out for us so contextually. You mentioned in just this conversation timeline, Bob Bertina as mayor at the time when Peggy sent that email to the then city manager, Chris Murray, now city manager in Toronto. You mentioned Fred Eisenberger finding out about that this was something that he wanted to not have the public see. These are two men who are trying to run potentially for mayor again. We know Bob Bertina's in, Fred hasn't told us yet. Do you think that we are going to learn more before October 24th, or that the judge will have some sort of a finding on their engagement and involvement? I mean, how do we make sure that the voters are educated before they cast their vote for mayor, given what we're hearing, Joey, just in the last minute that we have?
Well, there won't be any rulings from the judge, and that's standard for an inquiry. It's not election timing. There's no delay due to the election. The hearings are going to wrap at some point in June and July. And we're talking 115,000 documents, probably somewhere in the 500,000 pages worth of documentation, hundreds of hours of testimony. It's going to take time to write the report. And much like the Collingwood inquiry and the Bellamy inquiry and the Mississauga inquiry, these things take time. But that said, we're going to have a very good sense as I get into the writing phase of my reporting, finally, having spent the last while reading these documents and trying to get a grapple on all of it so that it makes sense. And I think that the voters of Hamilton, and this is another article that's coming very shortly on my part, is looking at Winnipeg 2014, London 2014, Niagara 2018, Vaughan 2010. These change elections occur. And in Winnipeg in 2014, they elected a person who never held public office before because that person promised honest, transparent government. And that person also stated that they would have to increase fees and taxes to pay to fix the problems.
And you know what, we might be at that stage. I know that when the non-politician mayoral candidate talked about cleaning up City Hall as priority number one, Keenan Loomis, I got calls from people who thought that's what we need to hear here. And these are people, money people who fund campaigns and have businesses, but they liked hearing that because this incompetence, whether it's incompetence or malfeasance or worse, it's holding our city back. Joey Coleman, I can't thank you enough for the work you do on the public record. The Oshow contributes to your incredible work. It's crowdsourced work. I hope everybody out there does as well.
You can watch the Red Hill inquiry online, live, and the inquiry. And this is arguably an advantage of, I originally thought it was, unfortunately, wouldn't be in person where you could really see the person on the stand and read their body language. But that said, because it's online, they're leaving the videos on YouTube. So you can go back and watch entirely and come to your own conclusions. Because again, we are in an inquiry where it's people's word against each other with missing documents, some documents. Make your own assessment if you have time, and I'll do my best to give you the source materials to do it.
You always do, Joey, and I will do my best to keep the conversation in the spotlight because we're paying for this, Hamilton, for a reason. We need to find out what happened. It matters. It matters who leads our city. And we have a very important, hopefully change election coming up on October 24th. Joey Coleman, for the editor of The Public Record, thank you so much for being on the Oshow and being one of the voices that people trust on the issues they care about. And I can't think of a much bigger issue than the integrity and the culture at our city hall when it affects all of our lives. Thank you so much for doing the Oshow. And of course, this is the election show for this municipal election. We're going to have amazing coverage coming up. So if you're enjoying it, please subscribe on YouTube so we can keep getting all this good stuff to you.